Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a mission that stitches together two worlds that really should never meet.
Not logically, anyway.
Exactly. I mean, think about the universe of Starfleet. It's all about order, protocols, warp drives, and then you suddenly smash that into the chaotic realm of dimension-hopping mutants.
Unbreakable adamantium, elemental command. I mean, it's just a completely different set of physical laws.
And our sources today detail this galactic crisis that's all fueled by genetic engineering on a world called Xhaldia. And then, completely out of left field, you have the accidental intervention of, well, the X-Men.
It sounds like it should be impossible, theoretical nightmare. But the coherence across all these sources, we're talking technical logs, depositions from eyewitnesses, personal journals, it's really incredible.
We have these really detailed scientific reports from Commander LaForge and Dr. Crusher trying to, map the impossible. And at the same time, we're reading these desperate, raw stories from the transformed population down on Xhaldia.
It's a fantastic contrast.
So, our sources, they start with a moment of just sublime boredom, the kind of thing that happens every day in Starfleet. And then it's interrupted by sheer, incomprehensible terror.
Okay, so set the scene.
We're on Starbase 88. It's thousands of light years from anywhere important, really. And there's this security officer, Marco Palmieri, finishing a grueling gamma shift.
Right.
He's patrolling this dimly lit, temperature-controlled cargo bay 6. I mean, it's the definition of routine.
He's probably dreaming of a better posting, right? Maybe on a starship, anything but this.
Anything but counting plasma conduit crates. And then his tricorder, which is designed to pick up these tiny energy fluctuations from a bad component, it just shrieks.
And it's not a containment breach or anything simple like that.
No. It's reading a massive, completely off-the-scale temporal flux artifact.
Wow.
Palmieri barely has time to even brace himself before the entire bay is just drowned in this brilliant blue-white light.
Yeah.
He said it was so intense it felt like his retinas had been scorched.
And then it's over.
It's just like that. The light subsides, the temporal flux readings, they drop back down to almost nothing. But the cargo bay is definitely not empty anymore. And the air, he makes a note of this, suddenly smells really strongly of burned ozone and sulfur.
And this is the moment. This is where this ordinary officer's entire reality just completely shatters.
Because standing there among all the crates are 7 figures. And they are very clearly not Starfleet.
And they have physical traits that just defy any kind of Federation biological classification.
Right. The first one Palmieri registers is this giant of a man who looks like he's made of polished steel. His first thought, and you can understand the terror here, is that it's a Dominion changeling, a shapeshifter.
Given the sudden change in his mass and that metallic look, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And then it just gets weirder. There's a man with these huge white wings, maybe 15 feet across, and his skin is a faint blue. And the one that really unsettled Palmieri was this figure with dark blue fur, pointed ears, golden eyes.
And a tail, a full prehensile tail with a little arrowhead tip.
Yes. And this creature, who we later find out is Nightcrawler, he just vanishes. There's this little audible pop, and he's gone, leaving that sulfur smell behind.
The whole scene is just pure chaos. One of the women, a younger one, she just sinks through the floor.
She just phases right through it. So Palmieri, he's desperate, right? He tries to stun this short, stocky, masked Guy Wolverine with his phaser.
And the steel giant just steps in the way, takes the blast, doesn't even flinch.
Completely unaffected. And they're all asking where their wee time-hook devices had gone. They're upset, confused, saying they got lost in transit.
And that phrase, time-hook devices, that is such a critical early clue.
It is. Because these aren't Starfleet temporal probes. There's something else. Something specialized that the X-Men use for short-range temporal jumps in their own reality.
So the fact that they're lost means their jump wasn't just an accident. It was, well, catastrophically imprecise.
Exactly. And that is our mission for this deep dive. We have to understand not just that these two worlds collided, but what kind of immense force or maybe intelligence pulled them together at this exact moment.
And how their arrival ended up solving this huge hidden crisis that was brewing on Xhaldia.
So we need to unpack the science, the psychology, and the terrifying politics behind the Dracon's true agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole thing, but let's start with the crisis itself on Xhaldia, which, up until recently is just a peaceful member of its local sector.
Right. And our sources, when they detail this population of the transform, they paint this picture of a sudden, widespread Well, a biological catastrophe.
The only real pattern, the only piece of objective data the Xhaldian government could even grab onto at first was the timing.
It happened consistently right around the individual's 22nd birthday. Didn't matter who you were, a student, a factory worker, an athlete. That 22-year mark was the trigger.
And Chancellor Ammon's science advisors were, they were really digging into this. They thought maybe it was developmental or a hormonal trigger, something like that. But they could never explain the actual cause.
To really get the panic, though, you have to look past the numbers. You have to focus on the personal trauma.
And for that, we have to look at the story of Erid Sovar. His transformation, it happened during this kind of adulthood quest, a solitary pilgrimage he was on out near these old ruins.
Otokar.
Right. And he was just climbing down on some slippery rocks, and suddenly his motor control just failed. Gone.
The sources describe it as this horrifying betrayal by his own body. His limbs just lock up, they go stiff and awkward, and he slips and falls hard, cracks his head open.
And as he's trying to get himself together, he sees his reflection in a puddle of rainwater, and he can see the changes happening.
Yeah, his blood vessels, they start to enlarge and darken across his face, and his hair, which was normally this thick blue-black, starts thinning out, like, really fast.
He described hearing this screaming sound and then realizing it was his own voice. Just overwhelming terror.
And the power manifestation, it wasn't something he controlled. It was completely involuntary and violent.
While he's kneeling there, his fingertips just start to glow. A hazy, pale light. And then that light just erupts into these brilliant white energy beams.
Like a pair of fireworks wheels on Tala Day, that's the quote. Just spraying this uncontrolled energy everywhere. And these beams, they pulverize the rock stacks around him. He wasn't just changing. His body was becoming a weapon he couldn't control.
Yeah, he was just one case. The scope of this outbreak was just unpredictable. The abilities were wildly diverse.
You have the horrifying case of Nikti Ilo. Her body just started drawing in ambient heat and light from everything around her. She nearly killed her own newborn twins with hypothermia just by being near them.
And Tessa Malik, a patient in a mental health facility.
Yeah.
Her emotional distress just amplified her powers, and she incinerated multiple beds in her ward with, raw mind power.
Imagine being a guard or staff member seeing that.
The list just goes on and on. A gymnast from Mercosite who could suddenly encase herself in this impermeable metallic skin. Others who could become undetectable or move so fast you couldn't even follow them with your eyes.
And maybe the most dangerous, socially speaking, was this illusion maker, Seven. Her illusions were so powerful and so involuntary they caused mass confusion, led directly to a fatal hover car accident.
So the Xhaldian government is facing this truly impossible problem. You have a population, specifically young adults, suddenly getting these unpredictable, impossible powers.
And their reaction was, well, it was immediate. And chillingly pragmatic. Chancellor Amon and Minister Tullett, they looked at this purely as a threat.
A looming catastrophe. Amon's exact words were that he was concerned that while they might only be acting in self-defense at first, given how unstable they were, they would inevitably lash out at someone and there will be a tragedy.
A fear that, justified a very harsh solution.
Mass incarceration. They repurposed this ancient, dilapidated fortress, Verdeen. It was this old stone stronghold left over from a war ages ago.
And the justification was that they were holding the transformed for their own safety.
But the reality, according to every source we have, was that they were treated like dangerous criminals.
That's the critical distinction, isn't it? They weren't patients, they were prisoners, held in this fortress yard with guards stationed up on the old battlements, just ready to fire stun weapons at the slightest provocation.
And our sources give us this really devastating detail. Erid Sovar and a few others whose powers were triggered by bright light, especially sunlight.
They had to spend all their time hugging the high, curving wall in the yard.
They had to stay in the shadows, constantly watching the sun move across the sky because the fear of an uncontrollable energy fit like the one Erid had in the ruins was just immense.
They knew one accidental flare-up meant the guards would just bury them in stun fire, or worse. So the physical confinement was one thing, but that psychological torture of having to hide from the sun just to survive, it made the safe fortress feel like a tomb.
Well, and that kind of pressure cooker fear, frustration, dehumanization, it naturally leads to resistance.
And that brings us to Rahatan. He was a newcomer, and his power was extraordinary. He wasn't just physically strong, he had this huge influence over the others.
And he had these formidable earth-moving abilities.
So when Rahatan insisted they be treated with respect and the government refused, he made a statement. Right there in the yard, he caused the high stone wall of the fortress to shudder violently, right under the guard's feet. Loosened mortar shook the whole structure. It was his opening shot.
The demonstration of power.
Exactly. And the breakout itself was coordinated and desperate. This one transformed. Layden, who had skin like armored chitin and incredible strength, he physically smashed handholds into the sheer stone wall.
While another, Danara, who had that metallic exoskin, shielded him from the guard's stunfire while he worked. They were using the very powers that got them imprisoned to achieve their freedom.
But freedom didn't mean, unity or democracy. After the escape, when all the free, transformed gathered near Verdeen, Rahatan immediately started to consolidate his power.
He set himself up as the leader, the ruthless, dominant leader. And this is where his character takes a really dark turn. It makes you question if he's a hero or just another kind of despot.
One of our sources says he eliminated a teammate just for suggesting they disguise themselves and live apart.
Yeah. He wanted absolute unified strength. This feels less like a freedom movement and more like a fledgling dictatorship being built on intimidation.
That's the moral ambiguity that the sources really expose. Rahatan saw any kind of dispersal, any idea of blending in as a weakness. He was afraid the government would just hunt them down one by one.
And that fear led to this chilling climax, right? With the illusion maker, Seven. She questioned his authority. She suggested that separatist idea.
And Rahatan's response was just brutal and decisive. He turns on her, his eyes blazing, and he just points a finger. And our sources are very clear on this. Seven just vanished, or was eliminated, right then and there. She was made an example of.
And Korba, another transformed who had sided with Seven, immediately backed down and said, "You had no choice."
And Rathan just gives this haunting smile. He confirms his intent to lead this new group no matter the cost. So you have Rahatan consolidating power through fear on Xhaldia, basically setting the stage for a civil war, while light years away, an accident is about to bring some very unexpected players into the mix.
So let's jump back to Starbase 88. Officer Palmieri's panicked report, it brings the full weight of a Starfleet investigation down on these new arrivals.
Who are strange, aggressive, and talking about time hook devices.
Right, and Palmieri's fear of a changeling, that gets dismissed pretty fast. Once Banshee, the red-haired mutant, he realizes he's in the wrong quadrant. His Irish brogue just kind of cuts through the tension.
And with this startling familiarity, he asks if they know a lad by the name of Picard.
That one question just changes everything. It goes from a hostile infiltration to this bizarre recovery effort.
Picard is summoned, and the priority immediately shifts to understanding the physics of what just happened. How did they get here?
And this is where Commander Geordi LaForge and Dr. Crusher really earn their paychecks. They're trying to fit these beings who defy all known science into their existing technical framework.
It's a huge task, and they have to start with the most baffling power of all, Nightcrawler's teleportation.
Geordi recognizes right away that this is fundamentally different from a Starfleet transporter. It's not matter-to-energy conversion.
No. Professor Xavier had apparently explained to his students that Nightcrawler doesn't convert his body at all. He physically enters and travels through a completely separate dark dimension. Some sources call it the balking dimension, before he reemerges in our reality.
The Enterprise transporter is clean, It's energy-based. Nightcrawler's method is messy. It leaves behind that sulfur smell, which is a byproduct of his entry and exit.
But Geordi's investigation, that's where he finds the first massive clue.
The Verteron clue. This is huge. Geordi's tricorder picks up this fine dusting of Verteron particles on Nightcrawler right after his first nervous bamf on the ship.
And Verterons are not, a common particle. Geordi explains to the senior staff that they are intrinsically linked to subspace phenomena. They're what Starfleet uses to generate and navigate warp fields. They're the guide rope for FTL travel.
So what you're saying is, Nightcrawler's mind and body, by sheer will, are manipulating space-time in a way that the Enterprise needs an entire warp drive to replicate.
It's completely mind-blowing. It forces you to ask these huge philosophical questions about consciousness. Geordi's initial theory was that Nightcrawler was doing with his mind what the ship needs a massive fusion reactor and a matter-antimatter reaction to achieve.
Okay, but if he can do that, why do they still need these time hook devices for time travel? Doesn't the energy required for a temporal jump suggest his own biological method is, inefficient? Or maybe just unreliable over huge distances?
That's a great point, and it's exactly what Geordi concluded. He tempered his initial awe by noting that even if Nightcrawler can access subspace, the energy required to propel himself across that continuum to cover interstellar distances or make precise time jumps would be enormous, probably way beyond his physiological limits.
So the time hook devices are basically a power booster. They provide the precision and the raw energy needed for controlled temporal jumps.
Exactly. His biological BAM is a short-range tactic, not a long-range navigation tool.
So while Geordi's dealing with physics, Dr. Crusher is dealing with biology. And she makes her own alarming discoveries, especially with Archangel.
She finds traces of what she immediately classifies as techno-organic material in his bloodstream.
Which is a massive red flag for anyone in Starfleet.
Oh, absolutely. Crusher immediately associates that substance with the Borg. Her first thought is potential contamination or even dormant assimilation protocols, a legitimate concern.
And Archangel, Warren Worthington III, he has to give her this deeply painful personal history. He explains it's a residue, left over from when the villain Apocalypse violently severed his natural feathered wings and replaced them with these metallic, razor-sharp ones.
A hugely traumatic process that left this technological signature deep in his biology.
And even though his natural white wings had grown back since then, the techno-organic traces remained.
And Crusher didn't just take his word for it. She consulted with Geordi on containment protocols. She ran complex scans to make sure the material was inert and non-contagious. This wasn't just a checkup. It was a high-stakes investigation into a potential new galactic threat, given their recent history with the Borg.
Right. And all of this intense medical scrutiny, this constant danger, it forces a level of introspection among the X-Men that gives us this crucial insight into the mutant psyche. And the profound difference between them and the transformed down on Xhaldia?
Take Archangel. He's born into immense wealth, privilege. He should be supremely confident, but Counselor Troy picks up on this deep underlying self-hatred and pain.
And his behavior on the Enterprise, like deliberately speeding down the corridors, aggressively testing security protocols, it wasn't just him being arrogant.
No, it was a test, a constant behavioral test. Storm explains this to Picard later. Warren didn't trust Starfleet's acceptance of him. He was constantly pushing, probing the boundaries, just waiting for them to reject him because he was a mutant, because he was different.
He needed to prove that their acceptance was real, or prove that it was a lie, and justify his own bitterness.
And you have to wonder, is that self-hatred really any different fundamentally from the terror Arid Sovar felt when he saw his own reflection changing into something monstrous?
It's like Starfleet was hosting two sides of the exact same psychological coin. One group dealing with a self-accepted but still painful difference, and the other with a sudden trauma-induced change.
Then you have Wolverine. On the surface, he's just this belligerent warrior, always ready for a fight, constantly gruff.
But he immediately develops this intense and really surprising respect for Commander Worf.
It was a clash of warrior ethics that found common ground. Wolverine's own, violent code of honor, it recognized the genuine Klingon sense of duty and discipline that Worf embodied.
They trained together in the holodeck. And Wolverine was genuinely surprised to learn that Worf's Klingon calisthenics program actually started on level 1. He just assumed Worf would always be at max intensity.
And they start building these bridges in the most unexpected places. Like in the Enterprise Lounge, Wolverine has this fascinating encounter with Guinan.
Guinan, the ultimate psychological chess master.
Right. She sees his hidden vulnerability and his need to constantly accept a challenge. She tells him he can't handle the stuff Worf cozies up to, which, of course, Wolverine immediately takes as a dare.
He's relying on his healing factor to get him through whatever she serves up.
And Guinan, with that perfect dry wit, just delivers him this gigantic mug full of prune juice.
A warrior's drink.
Oh, warrior's drink. It's such a great detail because it highlights Wolverine's code. He drained the whole thing, refused to concede, refused to show weakness. It shows that beneath all the claws and the attitude, he has this strict internal honor code that says you meet the challenge, even if it means drinking a gallon of synthetic space laxative.
And these personal interactions, they were so important for building the trust between the two crews. And that trust was about to be tested to its absolute breaking point. Okay, so the whole narrative just shifts on a dime when the Enterprise E arrives in the Antiochus system. They find this highly aggressive non-Federation ship in orbit around Xhaldia, the Drakon vessel, the Conherict.
The second they make contact, the whole crisis just snaps into focus. Data's technical analysis, combined with Wolverine's rather forceful interview of a captured Drakon officer,
Forceful interview. I like that.
it exposed the shocking truth about the transform. It was eugenics.
The Drakon motive was purely strategic and monstrous. Their geneticists had developed this incredibly powerful genome designed to grant combat abilities, a new race of super soldiers.
And their plan was to use these new super beings as breeding stock to fuel their own aggression against other species.
But it failed. The critical failure was that the Drakon's own DNA rejected the genome. Their bodies just couldn't handle the changes.
So they went looking. They searched the galaxy for a suitable, adaptable gene pool. And they found Xhaldia.
They introduced an airborne virus. It wasn't lethal, but it was designed to genetically modify the entire planetary population, to sow the right genetic seeds.
So the transformed were never a natural evolution, not a spontaneous mutation. They were a deliberately engineered crop, intended for conquest.
And their emergence at age 22, that created a calculated, limited window of opportunity for the Drakon to come and harvest their crop.
Before they got too powerful and too difficult to control.
This explains the first thing Riker noticed when they arrived. Xhaldia's communications booster satellites had all been systematically destroyed.
Right, because of the planet's intense atmospheric energy fields, they needed those boosters. The Drakon efficiently cut Xhaldia off from the rest of the galaxy so they could conduct their harvest in secret.
And they were clearly ready for a fight. The Conherect attacks the Enterprise immediately, launching these volleys of fiery green plasma.
And they crippled the Federation flagship almost instantly. Shields, weapons, warp drive all offline. Picard's ship was a sitting duck.
Which forced him to accept this incredibly high-risk, desperate boarding action, using the very assets the temporal flux had just dropped on his doorstep.
This whole plan hinged on Nightcrawler. Geordi confirmed his teleportation range, just a couple of miles, was just enough for strike teams to breach the enemy ship's hull, quickly and unexpectedly.
So Riker puts together these joint teams, seasoned security officers paired with X-Men, leveraging their unique and, let's be honest, chaotic strengths.
And the Worf Banshee team, their job was to disable the engine room. And they run into this specific lethal Drakon trap engineered by their high implementer, Xhaldia.
After they cripple the main drive, Xhaldia activates these powerful force fields and fire barriers, sealing them in a corridor, and then just starts removing the air.
A vacuum suffocation trap. A standard Starfleet crew, even with envirosuits, they would have struggled. They probably would have died.
But Banshee, with his sonic scream, he realizes the force field is being projected from one specific point on the bulkhead.
So they combine their talents. Banshee focuses his sonic shriek, this pure, vibrating kinetic force on that one spot. At the same time, Worf aims his phaser right at the epicenter of that sonic assault.
The combined energy blast cuts through the barrier, damages the projector.
And a life-saving burst of air comes rushing back into the corridor just as Worf is collapsing from oxygen deprivation. It's a perfect, desperate execution of combined forces. It proved the value of these unpredictable mutant powers.
And while all this is happening in orbit, the personal stakes are playing out just as dramatically down on the planet.
Lieutenant Relda Sovar, who serves on the Enterprise, he volunteered for the security detail, which leads him back to Verdeen, where he finds himself tracking transformed individuals, including his younger brother, Arid.
And Relda's carrying all this guilt. Arid always resented him for leaving Xhaldia for Starfleet, saw it as abandonment.
But that deep family conflict is just instantly eclipsed by the immediate threat. Relda finds Arid being actively hunted by Drakon soldiers in the ruins near the fortress.
And this is Arid's moment of choice. Despite all the bitterness, all the resentment, when a Drakon soldier recovers and aims a weapon at Relda's back, Arid doesn't hesitate.
He instinctively uses his terrifying white energy beams to save his older brother. The blast vaporizes the soldier. It confirmed that the bond of kinship was stronger than any resentment or any fear he had of his own power.
And Relda, deeply moved by this, he convinces Arid and his followers that Starfleet is actually there to help.
We also see Data's incredible ability to connect with another group of the transformed. He and a temporarily injured Nightcrawler were captured by a group led by Korba. She had power over toxins and chemicals.
And this group was, understandably, very distrustful. They had just escaped human oppressors, and now they're ready to lash out at any new outsiders.
But Data wins their trust. Not with phasers, not with force, but with vulnerability.
Yeah.
In philosophy. He starts a conversation about being different.
He pushes up his sleeve, opens the access compartment in his forearm, and shows them his circuitry. He reveals his own non-biological nature.
And he connects with them on the basis of being unlike any other creature in the entire galaxy. He explains that he, too, has been shunned and feared because he was different. And he asks them, knowing their own recent history of persecution, if they would really do to Nightcrawler, who's lying there, helpless, what others had done to them.
Shun him and fear him without cause.
And that argument, it resonates so deeply with Korba and the others. The emotional truth of his plea convinces them. They agree to revive Nightcrawler and cooperate with Starfleet. They realize Data is asking them to rise above the cycle of fear they had just escaped.
But not all the transformed were ready for that. Riker and Storm encounter Rahatan, the brutal new leader.
And he is actively using his immense earth-moving power to tear up the local city, causing the ground to explode, and he's already killed 2 Starfleet security officers, Wilkes and Calderon.
He's openly hostile. He says the only way to deal with the insects of the government, Starfleet included, is to crush them underfoot.
And his power is formidable. Riker's phaser blasts do nothing, deflected by this translucent shield Rahatan can generate. Storm realizes that just overpowering him isn't going to work. The confrontation has to be psychological.
So she engages him directly, she chastises him, she argues that in gaining all this physical power, he's lost his moral acuity, his ability to tell right from wrong.
She challenges his self-appointed dictatorship, and he responds violently, cracking the earth open right between her feet, creating this gaping, deadly crevasse.
And this is where Storm's command of the elements becomes decisive. She just floats effortlessly on an updraft of air she creates. She counters his massive, chaotic earth-moving with precise, controlled force.
She generates a massive cyclonic wind, a focused twister that just picks Rahatan up, spinning him faster and faster, neutralizing his ability to concentrate his powers until he just goes limp and unconscious.
She defeated raw, unfocused power with superior, disciplined control.
But even with all these victories, the Drakon High Implementer Xhaldia had one last desperate card to play.
He realized he couldn't capture the transformed, and he absolutely could not allow them to fall into Federation hands as potential superweapons.
So he launched a self-guided cluster missile, aimed straight at Verdeen. His goal was annihilation, just wipe out the entire engineered crop.
And Picard immediately sees the danger, a cluster missile detonating on the surface. The fallout, the loss of life would be catastrophic. He launches a high-speed shuttle pursuit, and he reluctantly agrees to bring Archangel with him as co-pilot.
It was a desperate chase. They plunged into Xhaldia's turbulent, hot atmosphere. Picard's using a tractor beam, trying to slow the missile down, battling these insane heat and G-forces.
And Archangel, despite his own emotional baggage and previous injuries, climbs out onto the open hatch, battling the wind shear.
And he has to rely entirely on Picard's advanced sensors and scans to locate the missile's encrypted disarming components. In this incredibly dangerous, high-stakes moment, Archangel, relying on pure focus and his unique biological speed, he disarms it.
Mid-flight, he proves his self-worth, neutralizing the missile just seconds before it hit its target. He saved everyone at Verdeen.
So, with the Drakon ship destroyed and the immediate threat gone, the Enterprise crew focuses on the survivors, and the core problem is still there. What do you do with a population that has these catastrophic, unstable powers?
And Dr. Crusher, as you'd expect, she leads the search for a permanent solution.
Her solution hinged on this fascinating idea. During the X-Men stay, Starfleet had managed to upload and synthesize a lot of data about Professor Charles Xavier.
So Crusher uses that data to create a detailed, highly intelligent, holographic Charles Xavier, a world-class geneticist and telepath, to work with her.
And that collaboration was key. The holographic Xavier provided the unique insight into mutation genetics that she needed to analyze the Xhaldian anomaly and, critically, devise a way to reverse the effects of the Drakon virus.
This whole process leads to this incredibly charged announcement at the rebuilt Verdeen Auditorium. Crusher offers the transformed a way out, a permanent genetic reversal process. It would reverse the changes and make them normal Xhaldians again.
And the reaction from the audience was just profoundly emotional and overwhelmingly positive. Most of the transformed, and, people like Arid's heartbroken parents, they expressed this immense joy and relief.
To them, the cure wasn't just integration. It was the end of a nightmare forced on them by an aggressor.
But our sources show this immediate visible tension in the room. While most of the crowd is cheering, Arid and Korba are just standing there stunned, shaking their heads.
Despite all his misery, his self-loathing over his power, he'd tasted what it could do. He'd experienced the agency it gave him. For him and for Korba, the cure wasn't freedom. It was a regression, a return to being helpless under Minister Tall's regime.
They had already started to value what they had become.
And that tension just illustrates the core philosophical difference here. For the Xhaldians, this mutation was a trauma, a disease forced on them. It was a reminder of being subjugated.
But for the X-Men, mutation is their identity. And that split gets even deeper when Dr. Crusher extends the cure offer to the X-Men themselves, the ability to become Homo sapiens, normal, unmodified humans.
And their rejection was, well, it was unanimous, immediate, and absolute.
Shadowcat, she speaks for the group. She says they don't want to be Homo sapiens. They've risked their lives. They've endured constant persecution and trauma, specifically to remain mutants and be accepted for who they are.
And Nightcrawler drives the point home with this devastating moral commentary. He reminds them that throughout their history, the only people who ever offered them the chance to be normal were their enemies.
The villains who wanted to eliminate them through assimilation instead of force. So the X-Men chose acceptance of difference, even with all the pain that comes with it, over the security of forced assimilation.
It's a powerful moment of self-definition. They chose their identity, defining their strength, not by what they escape, but by what they embrace.
With that whole philosophical dilemma settled and the crisis stabilized, the Enterprise crew had one last technical mystery to solve.
How did the X-Men even get here in the first place?
Geordi LaForge spent hours, probably sleepless hours, running diagnostics on the energy signatures they left behind.
And he came up with a final and really elegant conclusion about their temporal misplacement. The X-Men had used their time-hook devices near Starbase 88 several months before, and they thought they had returned to their own timeline.
But Geordi found that the stored time hook on Starbase 88, the one they would have used for their return jump, was lousy with Verteron particles.
And since Nightcrawler's own teleportation was associated with Verterons, that subspace leakage, Geordi figured that a deliberate, massive contamination of that time hook created a sort of elastic band effect.
This temporal elasticity just snapped the X-Men back to that exact moment and place in the Enterprise's reality.
So the event wasn't random at all. It was a precise, engineered manipulation of the space-time continuum. The question is, who could do that?
And the narrative concludes with a final, shocking reveal. The omnipotent entity Q, dressed in his Starfleet uniform, was watching the X-Men successfully return to their own reality. He's hidden, watching with his companion, the Watcher.
And Q confirms it. He engineered the whole thing. He's the one who contaminated the time hook with the Verteron particles.
Why?
Specifically so that the X-Men, who he condescendingly calls mutants, would be drawn to the Enterprise's universe.
His motive was just pure, whimsical interference. He knew the Xhaldia crisis was a mutant crisis, that Starfleet, with all its protocols and lack of experience with that kind of chaos, would struggle to solve. He wanted the X-Men eminently available to deal with the threat in the only way they knew how.
By embracing their powers and fighting an enemy that feared difference.
He claims, with that classic Q arrogance, that the X-Men were simply in the right place at the right time, and Xhaldia is all the better for it. And then he vanishes with the snap of his fingers. He solved a galactic crisis out of, mischievous boredom and a desire to see a good show. #tagoutro. So if we look back at this whole deep dive, the sources have given us some really dense, memorable takeaways. First, just the chilling depth of Drawcon cruelty.
Engineering a species for combat breeding stock. And then when they fail, launching a missile to wipe out their own creation rather than let them be free.
Second, that profound technical revelation from Geordi LaForge. The fact that Nightcrawler's teleportation uses Verteron particles. It proves his mind and body are accessing subspace, doing with biology what Starfleet needs a warp drive for.
Third, that philosophical contrast. The transformed struggling to accept their powers, seeing them as disease, while the X-Men see them as their non-negotiable identity.
And finally, the mastermind behind it all. Q, proving once again that some of the universe's most dramatic events are just the byproduct of an omnipotent being manipulating the timeline for his own amusement.
And for a surprisingly effective bit of crisis resolution.
But the core tension that's left, the most profound difference we see in the sources, it's all reflected in that final auditorium scene. Starfleet's best scientific minds, embodying that Federation ideal of order and integration, they offered to solve the problem by erasing the difference. Get rid of the mutation and you become normal again.
And the X-Men, forged in a world that feared and hated them, they chose a life of struggle over assimilation. They defined their strength, not by what they escape, but by what they embrace. They chose the acceptance of difference as their identity.
And that leaves us with the final thought, doesn't it? The one that echoes across both these realities and, our own personal struggles. In the face of immense, frightening power, whether it's internal or external, is true responsibility found in assimilation, in going back to the norm for safety and conformity?
Or is it found in the challenging, dangerous path of embracing and fighting for a unique identity?
A question worth thinking about long after that blue-white light of the temporal flux has faded.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly dense, deep dive into galactic convergence and uncanny heroism. We'll see you next time.